Eventually, we got it through council and came to the time where we got official build estimates and realised that it's not going to work.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the show. Thanks for joining me. Got another great show coming up with a developer who has gone from struggling with his first project to running multiple sites in the space of a few years. Before we get to that, here's a little of what I've been up to with my projects. Construction progress has slowed down on my townhouse project thanks to wet weather and trade shortages. The last month was about half of the month before, whereas normally I would be expecting activity to ramp up at this stage. It's frustrating, but there's only so much that can be done, and try as I might, the weather continues to defy my instructions. My other project is still in the pre-application design phase as we work through the scheme and different options to determine the highest and best use. We're still a while away from having a planning submission ready. The other exciting thing that recently happened for me was that hard copies of my new book arrived from the printer, in readiness for me releasing it to the world. The book is titled Become a $1 Million Property Developer, an insider's guide to wealth, fulfillment and glory, and shares my property development story, along with what I've learnt along the way. It's a must-read for anyone aspiring to become a property developer. It has been in the works for more than a year, so it's very exciting to finally have the printed copy in my hands. In the next episode, I will have more details about how you can get your hands on it. But if you would like an advance copy, then drop me an email at justin@propertydeveloperpodcast.com. And speaking of my property development journey, part of that includes the online training course I've put together for people who want to get into property development. So if you aspire to become a property developer, then check out the Property Developer Training at www.propertydevelopertraining.com and check out all the content that's available to help you get started on your first small-scale property development project. Or if you want to find out how ready you might be to become a developer, then take my free quiz at www.propertydevelopertraining.com/quiz. And for all the latest updates from my projects and what I'm up to, you can find me on Insta and Facebook under the handle of Property Developer Podcast. Be sure to check out the silly Top Gun inspired post I made this week. I'm sure it'll give you a bit of a giggle. Okay, just before we get to this week's guest, during the discussion, we make mention of a previous guest on the show, Lei Feng, who appeared in episode 89. Lei and I discussed how you can take your developing business to the next level through leverage and scale, and how a change in perspective can transform your thinking.
10 years ago, I'm the guy who walking up the ladder from the arbitrator skill. Now, every deal I look, I start from the top, because once you start from top, everything became a lot easier.
I had a great chat with Lei, so be sure to go back and take a listen to episode 89. All right, on to today's guest, Baheer Komak from EQ Property Group. This is a nice discussion for me because Baheer, or Baz, contacted me years ago after listening to the podcast outlining his desire to get into property developing. And so now we come full circle with him being a guest on the show to talk about his journey. Baz is now running multiple development projects and has come a long way since selling his small business and making the leap into property. Baz really struggled to get some traction with his property developing, and his first project, a small 3-unit site, was almost a total disaster before he turned it around by changing course. In this chat, we cover how mentoring transformed how Baz approached developing, some differences between project types, and the unusual decision-making process that led him to take up property developing. This conversation will be inspiring for anyone that is struggling with a sticky project and wanting to take their developing to the next level, as Baz is an example of how you can go from zero to something significant in a few short years. So let's get into it by finding out What food Baz would eat until he was sick?
I'd have to say it's definitely Afghan food, which is what my heritage is. And yeah, I could definitely eat that until I'm sick.
Oh, you'll have to be a little bit more specific. We don't go for just food groups here. You got to give us something specific.
It's a hard one. I'd say it would be the mantu, which is like a dumpling with a tomato-based sauce on it. That would be a food that I'd eat until I'm sick.
And how big are these dumplings?
They're about, let's say, if I could give you an actual size, similar to the Chinese style dumplings that you'd eat in a Chinese shop. Very similar size and feel to it.
So just the right size where you think, oh, I could just have one more.
That's pretty much right. Yeah, and you do have a lot more,
and you end up having more than one more.
Exactly.
All right. Well, look, it's great to have you on the podcast at last. You and I have been friends for quite some time, and you've had an interesting property journey into property development. So we'll get into that, but give us a bit of a background about yourself and how you got into property.
Yeah, sure. So I had a insurance business for tradies, which I sold about 4 years ago. And I had that since 2011, I think it was. And essentially what we used to do is we used to work with tradies and footy clubs and people on site and help them get all their insurances in place. And probably around about 2015, some changes were coming into the industry. Things were getting really hard, going to get a lot harder. And I just decided that I need to change the industry that I'm in. And interestingly enough, an offer on my business came shortly after that. And I decided that I'm going to start learning as much as I can about property development. And I think that was roughly the time I started listening to your podcast. So a mixture of listening to your podcast and some courses that I started with was my decision to get into property development.
And why property development? What attracted you to it?
Good question. The biggest thing is I looked at what vehicle, the business skills I already had. I just wanted to know what vehicle I was going to apply it to. And quite simply, I looked through the Forbes Rich List 100 list, and I just saw what everyone's what everyone's doing, and I saw property development listed numerous times, and I thought, okay, and I started to look into it, and that's how it all started.
So very sophisticated approach in that case.
Very, very sophisticated. Yeah, there's probably a little bit more to it than that, but that's how it started.
And had you had any involvement in property prior to that? Any investment properties or any contact or background in property?
No, nothing. Apart from buying an investment property, which is an off-the-plan apartment, which I sold because it wasn't going to do too well. Other than that, no background in property development.
Oh, well, you bought something off the plan. That gives you a little bit of insight into property development.
Yeah, look, I suppose so, but I wouldn't do that again.
Because most people don't come from that background where being a buyer, an off-the-plan buyer, to then moving into property development. Usually it's a investment into some existing housing stock.
Yeah, correct. That was an interesting story, actually. Drove past and the apartment was close to my mum's place, and she put a deposit down. And then came and approached me and said, I think you should buy this apartment. And I had a look at it and I thought, it's a great area. So that's what I ended up doing.
Another sophisticated decision there.
A sophisticated decision, yes. I can assure you my decisions these days are a lot more well thought out.
Well, let's try and get up to speed a little bit with where you are now, because you've come a long way in terms of your projects. I won't steal your thunder, but get us up to speed with your projects, because you've done a number of smaller multi-unit developments, but give us a quick overview of how you started and where you're at today.
Yeah, sure. Look, my first project, I have to admit, was in a little area called Rosebud down in the Mornington Peninsula. I wouldn't say it was the best project in terms of all the mistakes and all the things that you shouldn't do on a property development. But it was definitely learnt a lot of lessons that led me into understanding property development quite well. We can go into that a little bit later, but at the moment, I think as it stands, there's around about 9 to 10 projects in the works. I say 9 to 10 because there's one currently under due diligence, so it may or may not be a project. Pretty much they're varying. So we've got townhouses, land subdivisions, and small as a backyard deal, which I'm currently got on the market, which is quite exciting. Varied projects scattered around sort of Melbourne, but mainly concentrated in the southeast.
Yes, and I think one of your projects has recently been refused at council, so you're going to join me in the VCAT club.
Yes. So I went through the motions, as you know, Justin. I know your pains going through councils and VCAT. So I went through the motions and attended a council meeting and spoke with objectors and went, did the whole song and dance. And now we have to progress through the VCAT, which I'm in the middle of assembling the team and getting all the advice from people around me that have gone through it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yes, well, hopefully you get a positive result from that. But let's go back to the beginning. So Rosebud, why did you end up buying a block in Rosebud? Give us, what size was it? Give us a sense of the project.
Yeah, sure. So initially, look, it's a little bit hard to talk about because it was quite a tough project and it's still ongoing. But long story short, we did a course to learn about property development, and during the course, approached a couple of friends, and essentially said, "Look, we should do a property development. This is how it's all going to work." And we ended up acquiring a block, and with the plan to put 3 townhouses on there. And essentially pretty much did everything you shouldn't do, buying in incorrect structures, getting the wrong advice, not knowing anything about, storm water, and having what we call a legal point of discharge located 3 streets away. What else can I tell you? Build costs being grossly underestimated, you name it. So that's that project. And then eventually we got it through council, and came to the time where we got official build estimates and realized that it's not going to work. And this was around about 2016, when shortly after the market started to turn and getting finance became very difficult after the Royal Commission and APRA rules that came into place. And so we went through all of that, and decided to just hold for a while and just to see what happens in the market.
So at this stage, you had a permit for 3 townhouses. Is that right?
We ended up getting a permit for 3 townhouses, and then realized, the project's not really going to work. The person, one of the partners in the project, ended up losing their job, so we couldn't get financing. And there was a whole bunch of other issues that came out of it as well. And eventually we decided to hold the project. And I ended up actually going for a 4-unit permit instead, and getting it through the council with the help of one of my mentors. And now we're starting construction on that shortly, and going to be constructing the 4 townhouses. And the project thankfully has turned around, and we've got 3 pre-sales in place. And just waiting on builders, because of now we're facing all the build cost escalations, to come back and finalize a quote so we can start construction.
And I know that you've had a few ups and downs with that, and being your first project, what are some of the key lessons you've taken away from that one so far?
Oh, so many of them. The key ones would be making sure that you get the right advice from the start. And I'm talking about accounting and finance advice, and ensuring the person you're dealing with, really understands what you're trying to achieve, what you're doing, and having the right team on board. The second thing would be is just ensuring that your costs, we're quite green back then, so we didn't really know how much builds cost. It was just the old, 250 a townhouse, and that looks about right. So really understanding your costs and understanding and having, I suppose, a mentor or somebody that can guide you through that. There's so many unknowns in the development game, and unfortunately, you don't know them until you have to know them, and can be too late at times. So that would be my second suggestion: is really understand your feasibilities and your costs really well.
Oh, the good old days, hey, where you just say 250 a townhouse.
Yeah, it's interesting sometimes when people I speak to people even now that concept gets thrown around, and they say, "Oh, it's going to cost me about X amount to build a townhouse." And I go, "Well, how big is a townhouse?" I'm not sure. Okay, what is there a slope on the side? There's so many questions, and they're like, "I'm not sure about all that." I'm like, "Okay, I think you need to dig in and understand your costs a bit more."
And I think you just finished a smaller project in the last month or two. Did you know? A couple have finished in the last month or two.
Yeah, so we had one in southeast of Melbourne, which was a 4-unit development, and we purchased that. Me and some partners purchased that through COVID, and essentially just sold it a couple of months ago, and that's done really well. Sold at auction way above what we thought we were going to get for it, which is cool, and that made a baseline for the other 3 that we sold as well. So we're just waiting on titles and settlements for those now. And I also finished a backyard style project, which I went in and purchased somebody's backyard in Baronia. And that one's on the market right now. We built a single level dwelling. It's about double garage, 3-bedroom on the back of someone's block. And we made an arrangement to pay them out once the project's finished and everything's sold off. So that one's just about to complete within the next month, fingers crossed.
And a couple of different types of projects there. Are there similarities between them?
Look, in terms of, I suppose, understanding the process and going through council, applying an architect, building a team, appointing a builder, in terms of process, they're quite similar. But in terms of product and location and the types of finishes and fixtures that you need, I'd say they're different. One advice I'd have is to make sure that whoever is planning to get into development or currently in development to understand the local market quite well. So I generally do my research before we undertake this process to ensure that we're delivering the right product. Does that answer your question, Justin?
Yeah, and how do you go about doing that? How do you research the local market?
Look, get out on a Saturday and go to some open for inspections and have a look at, what people are wanting in the local area. Speaking to agents, also just getting out there and really having a look at what's happening in the local area and getting a feel for what you need to deliver.
Okay, and then you're using different sales agents in those areas, or have you got someone that you use for all your off-the-plan sales?
Good question. It really does depend on the type of product. So things that are, I suppose, selling for higher than the $1 million mark would just be using local agents in that area. Or even, for my Baronia project, I'm using a local agent who was very proficient with helping me on choosing tiles and fixtures and fittings based on his experience. And then some projects like Rosebud, we've worked through channel agents and investment groups who have helped us sell that product. So it just depends, on whether we need pre-sales or not. And that's the biggest factor. If I need the pre-sales, then I'll find out who in that area is doing quite well. What are they selling? How are they selling? Because pre-sales is very, very different to a finished product. It's a complete different game. So I definitely do my research and find out who's doing what in an area before I appoint an agent.
And then what about builders? Are you using local builders? Is a different builder for every job?
Yeah, generally, again, builders suited to that specific area. So, for example, I'd have a team, I selected 3 builders that I use in the southeast, 3 builders that I use in the north and for different suburbs of Melbourne. They don't all want to travel to all parts of Melbourne, and they're not always keen to go to different areas or even understand different areas. So I find some of my builders were really good. I wish they could go to different areas, but they don't want to. So it's very sort of location dependent.
And what about your design team or designer? Same people, or you're looking for someone that's got local knowledge?
That's a good question, Justin. How do I answer that one? I don't have a specific way of appointing it, but essentially, for example, on my Baronia project, I went with a local draftsperson, and essentially they understood that council really well and could work with that council and understood their requirements. I am at the moment in the middle of using an architect. You and I have discussed, architects versus draftsmen or design, building designers, as they call them. And essentially, I find that sometimes it's a challenge when that individual doesn't understand that council intimately, because different councils have their own ways of doing things. So that's a piece that I'm currently trying to work out myself for the future as well, because you have to really balance it out with that person being able to design something really well, but also understanding the council to an extent as well. So in the past, I've made sure I've always used local designers, but at the moment I'm venturing out into architectural firms and working together with a town planner to guide them.
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. It's horses for courses type of approach.
Exactly.
A smaller project with an experienced drafty in the area who's done lots of that type of project, probably pretty suitable.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'd go with that answer. It's a much better answer than my one, Justin. So if you smaller projects, local draftsman, I think it'll be fine. If it's something that's bigger, I would definitely also have a town planner attached to that architectural firm to ensure that they're meeting all the local requirements. A town planner that would understand that local council quite well.
So on your first project down at Rosebud, did you have a town planner helping you, or was it just the drafty or the designer that did the design that submitted the application on your behalf?
No, we had a town planner with a designer, architect.
Okay, very good. And then you've slowly gotten into bigger projects. I think your biggest one at the moment is 11 or proposed 11 townhouses.
Yes, so I've got one in the northwest of Melbourne, which is a proposal for 11 townhouses. I actually acquired that site myself by dropping a letter off to the individual house, and then ended up negotiating directly. It's turned out to be quite a decent deal just based on the land uplift alone, because I acquired it at the start of COVID. And then, as we know, everything in sort of rural Victoria has just gone skyrocketed post-COVID. So it's done okay from that point of view. However, we are going to have to go to VCAT and see if we can get an outcome there.
And what would you say the differences have been on that slightly larger project than, say, some of the smaller ones that you've done so far?
Good question. I think the biggest difference is the amount of community that gets involved when there's a bigger project involved, and having the council's involvement and objectives to deal with, and their points of view has been very challenging. In terms of the project itself, it meets all the planning requirements, it ticks all the boxes. As a matter of fact, we've also got a recommendation to accept the proposal from the council planner, which I find is a very odd process, where the council planner has accepted it, but the council has themselves have rejected it. So essentially they're arguing between themselves now. But I'd say that's been the biggest difference for me, is I haven't really dealt with having to attend a council meeting and dealing with objectors and all that type of stuff before.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where the council planner recommended that we get a permit for 17 instead of 19, and the council has just ignored that and refused the whole thing. So it's a bit frustrating.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't want to go down that conversation today, but yes, it's a very interesting process. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Some of it, especially given the fact that we're going through housing and affordability crisis, and apparently the supply of homes are quite low and we're needing more, and that whole process just doesn't make sense to me, how it fits within the overall goal of the state. But again, that's another rabbit hole I go down.
Oh, yes, don't get me on my soapbox, Baz, while we're on the podcast. We'll be here for ages. So tell me, what do you think you've learned about yourself from doing your property developing?
Good question. I'd say about myself, well, what I've learned is just my ability to take challenges. I found property development, the biggest skill you need is problem solving. And this is, I'd say, why perhaps some people don't progress in their journey in the development game, is because the challenges and the problems are weekly, if not daily. And you just have to be very good at resolving and solving them and coming up with really good solutions. So that's one thing I've learned. The other thing I've learned is just harnessing relationships really well, and maintaining relationships with your consultants, with your advisors and your team, and the importance of that. So I'd say that's probably the two biggest things I've learned throughout the process, or learned about myself.
Oh, well, Baz, I've just got my book back, How to Become $1 Million Property Developer. And they are 2 points that I make pretty clearly in the book around people that are aspiring or thinking of getting into property development. Problem solving and relationships, that's really what it boils down to.
Absolutely. 110% those two things. And just really, I suppose, having a big vision as to why you're doing it. It's very important. You and I are both the students of Dr. DeMartini, and having a vision and why you're doing what you're doing is going to be very important to the times when you don't want to do it. So, and going back to your why and, the reasons why you're in this game in the first place.
Yep, there's certainly plenty of challenges and hurdles to overcome, but that's what keeps a lot of people out of it. So it keeps those barriers up. Speaking of barriers, or what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've faced so far?
The biggest challenge I've faced, I'd say, would be adversity in terms of family. Unfortunately, about a year ago, my father passed away, and my business was growing rapidly during that time, and I had to deal with that and also ensure that I'm keeping up with the demands and the growth of the business. I suppose that was one of the biggest challenges I faced, and it seemed to be in the last year my business has grown exponentially, while dealing with that, during COVID and lockdowns, and was a massive challenge for me. So have to say I think I've done quite well coming out the other end of it, but nonetheless, very, very tough time.
And you mentioned that you got some help from a mentor.
Yep.
How did that make a difference?
The mentor that I've been working with for 2 years now really helped me think on a different level, especially with scaling my business and thinking about the development business as a business and not just, a side hustle or something that I'm going to attend to at some point in the day, and structuring it and helping me think on a different level, such as things like marketing, pre-sales, and where my business is going to be heading in the next sort of 5 years. And also the Rosebud project that I mentioned, he's actually helped me turn that around from a 3 to 4 unit site and get it out at a profit, which has been pretty big for me, and enabled me to take those learnings into my other projects.
Well, should we make mention of who your mentor is, seeing as they have been a past guest on the show, but only if you're comfortable mentioning their name?
Yeah, sure. It's his name's Lay, and I think he was on about two last show or 2 shows ago or something like that.
Yeah, only a couple of episodes ago now. So it's kind of fortuitous timing to have you on, talking about your own experience, getting some mentoring. I mean, I've seen the transformation that has taken place with you and how you've managed to transform your Rosebud project and go on and take things to another level. So it's obviously made a big difference.
Oh, absolutely, Justin. It was the thing I really needed. I was at the point of just absolute frustration and, wondering if I'm going to move forward with this industry or is it working, and so many questions that had come up. And plus COVID came around and I thought, there goes another bump in the road. So it was a bit of massive leap of faith for me at that time. I actually joined up with him when the lockdown got announced. So worked really hard over the last 2 years, put a lot of effort and time in, as you said, to get to the business to where it is now.
And so if you could go back to the beginning of when you're getting into property developing, what is the one thing that you would say to yourself to do differently or to focus on?
Good question. Only one.
Oh, no, you choose. If you've got more than one, feel free to share them with us.
Yeah, sure. Look, firstly, I wouldn't change anything. The journey has been fantastic, and the first one, or not going so well, has taught me so much. I just always think if I'd reversed it and it went well, maybe I'd be very arrogant right now, and maybe I'd be very on my high horse thinking, well, I've done really well and it's always going to be like that forever. So I'm glad that it went the other way. But if I had to go back and I suppose change something, it would be getting the right mentor involved in the first place. That's a very important step that's happened in my career. And the second thing would be just consider building the development as a business. So not treating it as something that's just on the side, but actually running it as a business. I'd say it would be the 2 things that I would have done differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right around taking a business mindset into developing, because I think people can take a hobbyist type approach to their projects, and that may be what it is. A project on the side, just do one every 2 years or 3 years, and that's fine. But if you want to take it to the next level, I think you do need that business mindset.
Definitely, yeah, and essentially that it is, you need to apply principles of business and ensure that you're thinking about future staff, you're thinking about how to systemize and put things into a order and organize your business in such a way where, for myself personally, where someone's going to come in and take care of some of those tasks that I may not want to do in the next year or so. I'll have staff supporting you, and so you're only sitting in more of a strategic / the areas of the business that you want to be sitting in and that are important. So that's my biggest advice. Yeah,
well, the number one thing for me is cash flow. Setting up a business, you need cash flow. Otherwise, you got no lifeblood of your business.
Yeah, I'd say, that's a whole another rabbit hole in itself. But definitely, you need to think about cash flow. It's, I think, the biggest killer of any property development business or any property developer is just the timing and spacing and getting such large chunks of cash, which takes sometimes 3 years, 4 years to come back the other way. That's one thing that I forgot to mention, is that people really need to consider time in this business. It's very important. I don't think, a lot of people talk about profits and what they've done and how they've done it, but not a lot of people talk about the time and the risk involved. Everything takes a lot longer than you think. When sometimes I see these property guys up there going, oh yeah, it takes about 2 years to get in and out of a project. And I just think, okay, does it really? Because things just drag on and on and on and on. So you have to be very mindful of your time and your cash flow.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because in the past month, I've financially closed out my last project, which long-term listeners of this show will know has taken me probably close to 5 years to finish. But it all officially wrapped up in the last month, all the money being distributed out of the bank account and in the process of winding up the entity. So yes, it can take a lot longer than you think sometimes. That was meant to take 2.5 years, that project, 3 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was nice. It's nice to have that one officially in the rearview mirror.
Well, I don't think I'm far off behind you with Rosebud, so we'll see who ends up taking longer.
Yeah, well, lots of lessons learnt there. So, what would you say is your top lesson that you've learned, or the top tip that you would give to another property developer that might be aspiring to get to a similar level to you?
I'd say know your numbers, really understand and know your numbers really well. And that includes all the small numbers that you may not be aware of, and getting the right help, either with an accountant or a mentor or somebody who knows what they're doing to enlighten you on what those numbers are. Just as an example, I think when you speak to an agent or when you speak to some people out there, the numbers can be quite light. Buy a land for 750, spend another 100,000 for your other costs, build a townhouse with 300 each, and then your profit's this much. But the reality of that is there's agents costs, there's infrastructure costs, there's council contributions, there's contingencies, there's all sorts of stuff you have to be mindful of. So if you know your numbers, then you can eliminate a lot of those issues by just looking at a site, plugging in all your numbers and all the fat that's required and going, all right, well, this works and that doesn't. And the other thing is most development sites don't actually work. As we know, Justin, I mean, I take a look at so many sites and I'd say very rarely does something come across my desk that actually works. And even then you get hit with a last minute surprise. So if you want to make sure that you're keeping your cash and your cash flow, know your numbers really well, and have your business plan ready. How many projects do you want to do? How much money is that going to take? How are you going to get that money? What is that going to roll into after that? Just having a solid business plan and working with the right people to develop that, I think are the two most important things.
Yes, very true. One of the only rules of thumb that seems to work in property developing is start off with your initial margin and then just watch it erode slowly away.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of stories out there of everyone who made money, but there's also a lot of stories of people who didn't. So you just don't hear about those ones.
No, that's right. People tend to keep mum when they didn't make any money, which is actually unfortunate, because I would love to get people on the show who were happy to have a frank conversation about where things went wrong. Like, what happened? What were the warning signs? Or particularly for things that didn't go as expected. I mean, there'll be plenty of projects where just someone overpaid at the beginning, and there's nothing mysterious about that. But there'll be plenty of other projects where things happened along the way that just sort of snowballed and led to something going horribly wrong. But it's very hard to get people to talk publicly about that or talk about it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do understand that. They probably just want to put it behind them and not mention it. But hopefully, look, my Rosebud and your project that's taken 5 years will enlighten some people that it's not all flowers and roses.
No, that's true. What about best piece of advice do you reckon you've received along the way?
I'd say the best piece of advice I've received in life would definitely come from my father, and that would be, what goes around comes around. And I say that in the context of, what you really put out there is what you'll get back. I'm definitely can tell you that's happened on a number of times with me. You look after people, you're going to attract the right people in your life who are going to look after you, and vice versa. So that's my biggest piece of advice. If you can just do the right thing, do the right thing.
Very good. I like it. All right. Well, any other comments or points you want to make before we start to wrap things up?
Yeah, I've actually got an interesting question for you, Justin.
Okay, very good.
So I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but from all your podcast guests that you've had, what is your 3 biggest learnings and takeaways after interviewing so many different people?
That is a very good question. Lucky I've got the power of editing, Baz, and I can cut and chop things out if I need to, but I'm happy to answer that question. The number one thing that I've learnt is cash flow, which came from speaking with the guy who used to be the CEO of Frasers, Rod Ferring. That was a key point that he made. He said, if you don't have any cash flow, then you don't have a business. And that's really stuck with me. And that's only been in the last couple of years. Spoke to Rod during COVID. And so I've really spent the last 18 months getting cash flow channels through the business.
Yep.
So that is probably a long way in front from everything else. So talking to all the people.
Yep.
That idea of cash flow. The second one was something that I picked up from a guy called Danny Chalmer, who did a lot of nice apartment projects around Melbourne, and he's still doing some. Actually, his latest one is down near you at Rosebud. But one of the things that Danny said was, if you want to get A-grade results from your project, then you need A-grade location.
Yep.
Like, don't buy in a B-grade location and expect to get A-grade results.
Good advice.
So that was something that has stuck with me. And then the other is fairly generic, and it's just around getting the best talent that you can afford on your team and not looking at those investments as an expense, but rather spending to get good quality advice, which may have a higher upfront cost, but if they really are good, talented people who have expertise, should save you in the longer run, whether that's over the life of a project or even on a longer term scale over a career, then it's worth paying that extra amount of money. For example, with architects or with extra design costs at the front, it might cost you more in the beginning, but you should get a more efficient build or more efficient design that will be more cost effective to build. So you end up saving money in the construction part of the project.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I actually had that one, but I had it a bit differently, called The Poor Man Pays Twice. And very true in property development. Yeah, you could definitely hire the wrong people and have to cost yourself a lot in the long run. So that's good advice.
I think when you're getting started, there's a real temptation to go for the cheapest.
Correct.
Like, can I get the cheapest engineer? Can I get the cheapest drafty? Can I get the cheapest builder? I just want the lowest cost. And actually touch on this in my book. It's like, don't be a cheapskate, but be conscious about what it costs. Go for value. Don't go for cheap. Go for best value.
I absolutely agree with that. Understanding what value people bring is so important. And I'm with you on that, 100%.
So there's a couple. You've also touched on relationships. That's something that I've learned from talking to people. It's just the value of having good people or experienced people around you and the difference that they can make, particularly if you're inexperienced. Then try and find people who are more experienced than you on your team, or that can help you through a phase of your development, personal and professional.
Thank you.
It's okay. It's nice of
I've
you.
got no more questions.
Nice of you to have a takeover of my show. Start asking me questions, Baz.
I think one day you might want to do a reverse one where you get interviewed.
Yes, I've been on a couple of other podcasts, and it is a bit weird being on the other side of the microphone, having to answer the questions than the one firing the questions away. All right, well, we're closing in on the finish line here, Baz. Got anything else you would like to ask or would like to say before we wrap things up?
No, that's it, mate. Thank you very much for having me on. I enjoyed this and look forward to hearing it.
Well, thanks for being on the show. Where can people find out more about you if they might be interested?
We're on Instagram. EQ Property Group shows a lot of what we're doing on there. I'm pretty active, so that would be the best place.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes, you do post some good stuff on Insta for people that might want to see your projects and what you're up to. So check out EQ Property Group. And thanks for coming on the show and giving us an update. It's been awesome watching your journey over the last couple of years, going from aspiring developer to actual property developer, and then dealing with all the problems along the way and getting into multiple projects. It's been pretty awesome. So congratulations on what you've achieved so far.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for your support, mate. Really appreciate it.
That's okay. Good to talk to you.
You too. Cheers.
See you, Baz.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.